athletes today. Someone used that term. I was around like educators, so it doesn't really relevant in this context, but well, then you got to move up to the front row then. Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our at CPW here. For our days are numbered here, where it's like mid-November, and we're already planning our departure in mid December. So we actually have. You're here for Meet the Artist Night. If you haven't already been here for one of our nights, we meet weekly for the past couple years, I think, at this point now. And we get to kind of hear it straight from the artist's mouth, what they're up to, the secrets, what's behind the what's to come. A couple announcements before we get started. We've got an announcement from Edward Huber over here in the second row. CPW member and friend who has some work up nearby at the Village Grocery and Refillery. So I guess it's up till December. So if you're interested in some good coffee and snacks and got a bunch of gluten-free stuff and seeing some of Edward's photographs, and you might know his work because he has done a lot of the photographs depicting our beautiful new building, which we will be moving into in January. So that said, we will be closing the Digital Media Lab here on the 21st, I believe. Don't quote me on that date, but here, and then reopening a month later at the new building. So if you were planning any holiday gifts or like end of the year exhibitions, or if you want to submit something to our open call, which will be the inaugural exhibition in our community gallery at the new building, which will be an open call for, I think the requirements are if you can deliver it framed up to 16 by 20 within the time frame that we designate in January, you're in the show. So keep an eye out for that announcement. But if you don't have anything already in mind, you would want to, book some time in the Digital Media Lab in the next couple of weeks, or hire one of our fabulous staff to print it for you. Couple more announcements. We've got our heirs in the house, who maybe you saw last week at their artist talk, Harlan Bozeman and Salvador Espinoza. If you're kind of curious what the air program's been like, and from their perspective, please say hi or introduce yourself. They have a couple more days left. And we'll be welcoming Ali Capel, who is our next artist in residence. And lastly, I want to introduce Cesar Castro, who is CPW's, we're very excited, is our CPW's community engagement coordinator. Sorry. And we're just so happy. So say hi to Cesar, please. We'll give him a warm welcome. Okay, so last but not least, we are joined tonight by Lydia Panas. Did I say that right?
No, Panas.
Lydia Panas. Normally I ask that before we start, but here we are. Lydia Panas is an artist working with photography and video. She is interested in women, identity, and what lies below the surface, investigating questions of who we are and what we want to become. Panas' work has been exhibited widely in museums and galleries in the U.S. and internationally, including the National Portrait Gallery, Phillips Collection, Artist Space, and Künstlerhaus Bethanien. Her works, it's in Berlin. Her works are represented in public and private collections, including the Brooklyn Museum, Bronx Museum, Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Palm Springs Art Museum, Allentown Art Museum, Michener Art Museum, and Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago, among others. Her work has appeared in many periodicals, including The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Hyperallergenic, and PDN. Panas has published 3 monographs, The Mark of Abel, Falling from Grace, and Sleeping Beauty, which I believe you have 2 of those publications in the back, so you could buy yourself a copy or take a look at that. She divides her time between a farm in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and New York City. Can we give Lydia a warm welcome?
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invitation and for that lovely introduction. So I am going to do an overview of my work. I'm going to start in the 90s, and I'm going to do the entire arc all the way through to like yesterday. So yeah, if I go too slow, just kind of go like this, and I can try to speed it up. Yeah. So you go back to your girlhood, and you become all the things you were supposed to be, but at the time you didn't know, because you were trying to be what other people thought you should be. I don't know who wrote that. It's not mine. It's not my quote. I heard it somewhere. I can't remember. But when I heard it, I was just struck, like, immediately, like how, wow, yeah, and that on some level really describes the arc of my work. My whole body of work is very much about, it really is about really my life as a woman, my life as a human being, like my feelings. The work is very much beneath the surface. It's not about my outer life. It's not about my family. It's not about my husband, my wife, my teaching, all the great things in my life. What it really is about is what goes on underneath in my unconscious. I've been studying my unconscious for over 30 years, and I have come to understand so many things about, for instance, this quote about why I had to find my way back. So I'm going to start here. All of my work is made on this farm in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. My husband and I moved there in like 1989, after about 10 years in New York City, where we raised 3 kids here. And it has become home for me. It's where I make all my work. And it is very much about home. It's about place. It's about time. And it's very much about belonging. My parents, I mean, I'm the child of, I am the daughter of immigrants. I'm the eldest daughter of immigrants, which they often say is like the hardest job in the world, eldest daughters and immigrant daughter. My parents had come here very temporarily from Greece to study, to finish their residencies. They had 2 daughters in quick succession. We moved back to Greece. By the time I was 2, we moved back to Greece. We fully intended to stay there, to live the rest of our lives as Greek people, which we are. And when I was about 5 and a half, my dad said, I can't practice medicine anymore here. We're going to move back. We moved back to the States. I was in like kindergarten or first grade. It was like October, November. I didn't speak English. It was a little traumatic. Never mind the non-speaking English, but even the kind of going back and forth, all that back and forth. And then between the time I was 5 and a half, 6, and 8, we moved 3 more times. Until we finally settled when I was 8 and a half in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where my father found a job he liked, and that's where I ended up growing up. So I think the reason I mention that to you is because I really never felt like I had a homeland. I would be in Greece and I didn't feel like I didn't really belong there. I would be here. I never really belonged here. And it really wasn't until we moved back to this farm, which really isn't that far from where I grew up. It's about 25 minutes past where I grew up, where we made a home. We raised 3 kids. We reforested. This land had it's 70 acres. You can't really see the trees in this picture, but we reforested half of these 70 acres. We would plant like 100 trees every fall. We renovated this dilapidated old farmhouse. It became a place where I ended up finding. It was not just a home, but it was a language, and it was, I guess it was a place to belong and a place that grew with me. Yeah. So I'm going to start way back in the 90s. I started so at the point, in the 90s, I had 3 little kids, and I was teaching like all over the Lehigh Valley, which is where I came from. And I needed to make work that was sort of kind of easy that was around. So I started photographing my kids, my friends' kids. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I mean, it's taken me years to really understand like what I've been doing, but I loved photographing people. Since I was a kid, I was very interested in who people were. I've been looking like, I watch people very, very closely. I'm very interested in like who people really are beneath like the presentation that we show. And this is something that I learned very early on. I mean, I did it. It was a bit of a survival technique for me, honestly. And I realized that when I picked up a camera, it was what I was drawn to, looking at people and watching them to see what was going on. And one of the things that interested me was relationships, watching people, you know, next to each other, with each other, amongst each other, and also just on their own. So the very early work then was black and white. I worked in black and white for maybe 20 years, something like that. And I started making photographs of my kids. These are from a series I did in Italy. This was the year that I was pregnant with my third child, actually. This was 1995. I was pregnant with my third child, and my father was dying of cancer. And we spent the summer with my sister in Italy. It was really, really hot, and it was a very confusing time for me. It was a very conflicted time where I was expecting this brand new life, and I was also like losing someone I was very close to. So as I made these pictures of my kids, what I realized later, not at the time, was that they weren't portraits of my children, but they were more pictures of the kids. They were photographs where I was arranging them in some way that I was trying to say something about me, not so much about them. And it's not that I wasn't watching them, but it was really much more about what I was trying to convey, which I didn't really know at the time. And in fact, as I was watching them, I was just kind of like, I thought this is kind of interesting. This looks kind of cool. This one is actually the year later, actually in Greece. This is a photograph of the village where my father came from. But one of the things I noticed later as I looked back, and certainly this is an edit, was that a lot of the photographs from that time period showed the kids with their eyes closed. It wasn't all the pictures. I mean, this is definitely an edit, but there were a lot of them. And as I look back, I thought, oh, this is because I was so worried about my dad dying and I didn't want to think about it. Like that was how at the time when I would speak, that was how I thought about it. But in retrospect, as I look back at so many of these photographs of these kids, you know, with their eyes closed, I see now it was more a metaphor for my own unconscious. It was really much more of a metaphor for the things that I had refused to look at as a child, the things I didn't want to see. And so there's a lot of this idea of these closed eyes. Yeah, these aren't mine, but somebody else's kids. And some of them, interestingly enough, had this very ominous feeling to them. Like this little girl, and it's actually my daughter, but this look in her eyes. You know, I mean, when you take a series of photographs, there's clearly a lot of images, and you pick one. And this was the one that felt right for me. And as I looked, I never really thought about it till recently, but I thought, I mean, her eyes are they look so scared, and there's something so frightening and almost shocked about her. And so one of the things I think is important to understand about my work is that, again, it's not about these kids, not about my kids. I mean, my kids are nothing like this. But it's really more about the feelings that I was trying to convey, my going back to my own childhood and actually trying to convey to the viewer what it felt like to be a little girl, what I felt like as a little girl. And I think that's a good thing to kind of keep in mind as I go on. The other thing that I think pops up in a lot of my photographs, and you'll see that all the way through, is this sense of defiance, this sense of anger, maybe sadness, maybe defiance. In this one too. This one I called the Gang of Three, after the 80s band, the Gang of Four, which was actually named after the communist group in China. They always had attitude. My kids always had attitude, and I loved it. Like I would watch them, and I would watch how they would put on these faces, because they really didn't love being photographed. But I so related to the idea of them having all this attitude. As a child, when we used to pose, my mom would say to us, you know, here, let's pose. And we'd stand there and she'd be, Kelly, now smile. And we couldn't stand it. Like, I remember thinking, I don't even want to smile, you know. And so I think that I have brought all of that stuff into my own photography. And when my kids were sort of doing this sort of subordination, I was like, yeah, cool. I love that. You know. And then I think the other piece that we want to kind of keep in mind as I move forward with this talk is the idea of evidence, of clarity, of evidence, of consciousness, of awareness. I sometimes think that I became an artist because I wanted to prove to myself that what I saw actually existed. And this photograph just reminds me of this. She has this doll and she's like, here's the evidence, like, here it is. Now, I photographed my kids too when they were about this age. And then they said, no, we're done. And so I was at this point teaching. I was really busy. I was running around. I had very little time. And so I had this tiny little studio, I mean, maybe a quarter of the size of this room in my house at the time. And so I did a series of still lifes from 2000 to 2005. I did a series of still lifes. This one was the one that was like conceptual still lifes. This was the one that got the most attention. It was called Chocolate, Hair, and Lint. And so for 2 years, I collected baker's chocolate that I would buy at the grocery store. And I would, every time I bought some more, I would, put it out there and I would photograph it. So it was very easy for me to kind of work without thinking, really. I could just kind of go with it. And as the boxes got, as the chocolates got bigger and bigger, the amounts got bigger and bigger, I would photograph them till like finally, after 2 years, this is how much chocolate I had collected. But I collected chocolate. I collected hair that fell from my head when I blow dried. And the chocolate I called portions, right? There were portions, like 17 portions, 25 portions. The hair, I called them blows because they were blow dries. So it was like 16 blow dries or 25 blow dries or blows, though I called them just blows. And then at a certain point, I put them into boxes because they were easier to switch around. And this was like the biggest one. This was the biggest amount after 2 years. It looks like less than it is. It's actually a lot of hair in 2 years. And I was also collecting lint from the clothes dryer from my children's clothing, which sort of let me feel like I am, still photographing them. It's sort of like the remnants of like their clothing. Yeah, so I call these cycles. Like, I don't remember the numbers now, but 45 cycles, 65 cycles. And as I was photographing with a 4x5 camera, with the camera like pointed down to the ground, and the lint was getting bigger and bigger, it was getting closer and closer to my camera. So this was the most amount of lint that I did. And then I would show them in different configurations, but it was always like all together. You could always see like there was always a mixture of chocolate, hair, and lint, which is this kind of weird combination of things. The chocolate is even though it's bittersweet chocolate, it's still about desire. The hair is, on the one hand, it's kind of ugly. I mean, it's really kind of gross, like when you think about chocolate and hair at the same time. But it's also about my own body. It's about aging. It's about moving forward. And certainly all of this is about time. And then, of course, the lint was about family. So it was sort of a conceptual rendition of my life. Another piece I did in that time period. This was 2004. I did a residency up at Banff Center for the Arts, and there were like, I don't know if you've ever been to Banff Art Center, but it's just like a lot of people from like international people. I did a video. It was the 2004 election where George Bush was. It was the George Bush election. I think it was the second one. It was the one where we were moving into Iraq, and it was very controversial. There was a lot of like this fear kind of mongering that was going on. So I did this thing that I call a 4-channel video that I called Imminent Fear. Imminent, the imminent with the A, immanent, meaning that kind of fear that's like inside of you, that kind of like fear that's always kind of hanging around. And I asked 50 different people, 50 very different people, 20 questions. And the questions, they were all the same questions, and I asked them all in the very same order. And they were questions like sort of generic, like describe what fear means to you, or is fear a driving force for you, or do you fear death? Do you fear aging? Do you fear nothingness? Do you fear doubt? Do you fear peace? Do you think fear and conflict are related? So it started to move into a little bit about conflict, and because I was thinking about the war. Do you fear peace? Do you think fear and conflict are related? Do you think people can fear no conflict? Are you afraid of terrorism? Why do you think the United States is in this conflict in Iraq? And then the very last question so basically what I did was I kind of warmed people up so they would get very comfortable. And at the very end, I would say, what do you fear? What are you afraid of? So at that point, people are kind of warmed up and they kind of had an idea. It was easier for them to talk about it. So this was just one of the places one of the venues. These are the two of the speaker of the channels and two other ones. And what I would do is I edited them down to about like 3 minutes each. I mean, they're really short. I just take like the most interesting piece of what someone would say, and then each person had like a very quick little blurb. So the exploration of who we are and what we want to become. Is there ever any other subject? And just to go back 1 second to the fear video. So that was the beginning of my maybe thinking, and maybe not completely consciously yet, about how getting over one's fears means running into them, running towards the danger. This idea of thinking about fear, which is, again, if we go back to how I had sort of started this talk, my whole way of kind of overcoming all my own childhood issues was really to look at what I had been afraid of for so long. It's like to look into the fears. Miuccia Prada, is the designer, right? She's a very famous designer. She's also a PhD in philosophy. So in 2005, I did a complete turnabout. We renovated one of the barns on our farm, and all of a sudden I had a huge studio, and I was like, wow, I really got to do something about this. And I thought I might just try color. I had never worked in color before, and the kids were out playing. My nephew and niece were in from Italy, and I was just like, they were staying with us for the summer, and I said, why don't you guys just stand right here. I just want to do a color test. And I took maybe 3 or 4 photographs with my 4x5 camera with color film. And this was like basically the first color photograph I took. And this is the picture that's actually on the cover of my first book. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. So I invited someone else. And so these kids had a very long history together, which is where I got the idea. So then I invited someone else. And I was like, I started inviting students, are you interested in coming to my place? You can bring anyone you have a long history with. And then this is a friend of ours who lives down the road, and he brought his 3 children. And I started just looking at them. A friend of mine with her husband and her 2 daughters, I would invite them and just watch them. I realized in the very beginning, I thought, I should be doing something like moving them around, but that never works for me. And I realized that my real interest wasn't just watching who they were around the people that they had a long history with. Always interested in what's going on beneath the surface. What's going on? We always have when we have these presentations that, we have a presentation, the way we present ourselves to the world. And then there's the stuff that we don't talk about. And that's what interests me the most. So this is a mother. So people came in all different shapes and sizes, these were girlfriends. This was like a mother and daughter, 4 sisters. I was really just watching to see what would happen. This was the one in the middle was a student of mine, and she brought her sister and her mother, my husband and my oldest son, 2 sisters. And these young women brought a third sister. There was a third sister, and in every photograph, this is the only photograph that the youngest sister wasn't in, and I to this day feel so terrible that I had to cut her out, but this was the best picture, and that's just one of these things. I was really just looking not to judge and not to say something in particular, but just to, I edited them and I selected the image that felt the closest to what I understood in my own life. More students. This is actually an aunt and a niece. A family, fathers, their 2 children, and a mother and a son and his son, so a mother, son, and grandson. and this one is really one of my favorite. It's this idea of, again, this is also the last photograph I remember taking in this series, where I just asked the younger sister to close her eyes. But for me, this image feels very much like the one sister is looking, like very clearly looking, and the other one is just like closed her eyes to what's going on. This idea of looking and not looking, seeing and not seeing, what we're willing to look at and what we're not looking to see. Anyway, I did this from 2005 to 2008, and it ended up becoming the subject of my first book, which I have here, which you can look at or purchase. And this particular series, it became big. But after 3 years, I kind of felt like I could do it. And once it didn't seem any hard for me anymore, I thought I had to change. I had to change it up. And so to change parameters and kind of just change things up and just like shake things up, I went from a 4x5 camera that I was using with the other series, and which is horizontal, to a square format, like a square format Hasselblad. Like, this is all film, and also from groups to singles, and from outside to inside. So the light was, so there were a lot of parameters. Anytime you change, parameters, I mean, for those of you photographers know, when you go from one parameter to another, it's like re-looking, you got to really change the way you see. And my Italian niece and nephew were visiting again, and this little nephew of mine happened to be, we were having dinner, and he was sitting next to this melon that I was going to cut up for dessert. And I just said, Marcello, you and that melon looks so good that we're not eating this tonight. We're going to shoot this in the studio tomorrow. So I brought him into the studio, and he just asked me, what should I do? And I said, I don't know. I just hold it. And I said, just whatever you do, hold it so that you're hiding the little red decal in front of you, because I don't really like that decal on your shirt. And when I got that photo, and I mean, I say this to you, I explain this because this is kind of how I start all my projects. It's just like, okay, it's just an inkling I have. And I took it, and when I got this film back, because I would send my film to New York and have it FedEx back, so there's always this lag. I was like, wow, that's weird. So I asked my daughter to come out, and I picked some mint from the garden, and I asked her again, and I photographed this. And again, I thought, interesting. And I just started doing it. I just started inviting people. I was like, I don't know, are you willing to come? And I would just ask them to wear something kind of neutral, just something plain. And I would have like either some food like this. I had figs, and I probably had a few other things, and we kind of just picked something together, and what sort of went with whatever she was wearing, because I would really never know what they were coming with. Chili peppers. And I did this for a year. And after a year, a lot of times I work without really printing it out. I make contacts, but without really looking at them. So my husband had said, why don't you print them out? I said, I think I've just wasted a year of my life. And he says, why don't you print them out and put them on the floor and just look, hang them up or something and look at them. And when I did that, when I put them all together, I realized like what was going on. Like there was something much more important going on than I actually thought was happening. And it was just sort of happening without my even understanding it. So the way I was thinking about this now, especially in retrospect, the way I think about it is like food, you'll see comes up in my work over and over again. Like I not purposefully, but it just kind of comes up over and over again. I think of it as like nourishment. Food is how we learn to love from the very beginning. The way we are fed is the way we are the way we're brought up, and the way we learn like how the world responds to us. So food kind of stands for nourishment. In this particular series, and when you see all of the photographs together, it's like a banquet, and there's all these people coming to all these people, for instance, have come to this banquet, and they're all bringing their offerings, but you kind of can't tell in their faces like how interested they are in actually giving it up. There's these kind of conflict in the faces. There's this kind of neutrality. There's this kind of conflict. There's this kind of sense of that, like the intimacy is sort of broken. It's sort of unclear, and it leaves the viewer a little uncomfortable. There's like this sort of sense of like, what is going on here? Like, is this really a party? Like, am I really welcome at this party? The beginning, again, of my really understanding, where I didn't really understand it, but the beginning of really this idea of relationships and the difficult parts of relationships, I'm interested in those difficult areas of relationships. And I called the series Falling from Grace, kind of referring to the idea of losing, of letting go of other people's expectations, of really just sort of letting go of the old, letting go of who you were supposed to be, letting go of who everyone else expected you to be, and just kind of doing what really going towards your own freedom. So there's this one. This was the front of the book. This is the front of the book. And this is actually the back cover of the book. And again, all this work is made on my farm, like either in the studio or on the land. All of it is, yeah.
Do you use natural light or artificial light or a combination?
All natural. I use all natural light. I've never personally been able to replicate the beauty of natural light, for one. And for the second reason I do it is because it's so unexpected. And it's always a challenge for me. Like, natural light is hard. I mean, because you never know if you're going to have enough light, especially So I do it partially because I think it's more beautiful, but partially because it just keeps me on my toes. I'm still, after all these years, still learning the light in my studio. One of my favorite quotes: "Things are never what they seem to be." That probably explains itself, speaks for itself. In 2011, I went back outside, and again, back with the 4x5. This time I added a different element. I was trying to change it up. This time I added this curtain that I was sort of working around. This is, in the studio, I always have a backdrop, and I have lots and lots of fabrics, and so I was starting to take some of these fabrics outside with me. But it does always seem like no matter what I'm doing, it always feels like there's my trademark kind of just keeps coming through all the time. My interests, when I get into a photograph with someone, I'm so focused and so much focused on that person and what's going on between us, between them and between us. And it seems like the deepest unconscious parts of my personality seem to kind of come through all the time in these works. Yeah. And relationships is something that I'm just very fascinated by. Just watching people. They don't have to do anything. When you're watching people together, there's like a million things you can see. These three kind of go together. These are these twin sisters that I've been photographing for years, and they pop up in all of my work. A lot of my models, in fact, pop up in a lot of my work over and over again. The difference, the conflict between presentation and maybe inner feelings, what things look like on the outside versus what they might feel like on the inside, what's going on underneath, how we present ourselves. Restrictions, right? I mean, I'm interested in this idea of personal restriction, why we restrict ourselves, how we get out of that. And this sense of kind of like defiance, all of the things that I've sort of had to work through from my own childhood. It's what we don't say that has always interested me. It's the elisions in our stories, what we choose to talk about and what we choose to not say at all, what we hold back. I find that it's been a fascination for me. And so I have a number of other series. This is from a series, I think I called it Longing in Black. It's about connections. It's about intimacy. It's about the complications of intimacy, how intimacy can be, difficult, how it's not always easy, And I tend to photograph both adults and children. I'm always mixing the two. Right around here, this was around 2014, I started photographing exclusively women. So Gail Buckland, the curator and photo historian, wrote about my work in a catalog a number of years ago. She said, Panas's portraits are about relationships. Always there is the core relationship between herself and the individual in front of the camera. She speaks about falling in love with her subjects. She doesn't take a picture. She embraces a person. Like all great portraitists, she does not flatter. She probes. her pictures are often disquieting. Yeah, this thing about falling in love, I think like that's what the best portraits are made of, really. They're made about love. Like when you bring up the idea, when love is involved in some way, like I think, yeah. Holding On. This is a series I did sometime between 2013 and 2018. I thought I would try to make it sort of more comfy cozy, make it seem like more upbeat. So I asked everybody to hold, I called it Holding On. I said, I'm doing this series called Holding On. I want you guys to like hold on to each other. And strangely enough, they all came out the same, like everything else I do. There's just this strong, strong current of my unconscious running through like all of my work. Yeah. Yeah, so whether it's families or couples or best friends or sisters, mothers and daughters, more twin sisters, family, a family with their 2 twin babies. A photograph is a secret about a secret. The more it tells you, the less you know. While I was doing that series of portraits, I also, whenever I didn't have a model, I was like desperate to go outside and make photographs. The light was beautiful. I would basically jump in our little, it's like a utility vehicle sort of, and I would take the poles from the poles that, you hang backdrops on, and I would drive out into the fields. Usually it was kind of drizzling or raining or kind of gray out, and I would set up these little like mannequins, which to me felt like people, and I photographed them. I had the same feelings I was photographing them as I do when I'm photographing people. Like it was noticeable to me that I was like, wow, this feels just like making a portrait. And so with the 4x5, I made a series of portraits kind of on the side. I didn't really think this was going to turn into anything. It was sort of something I did over a period of about 3 years. And I called them ghost portraits. It was really a paean to my father. My father, when I had told you earlier that we had reforested this property, we had spent like 10 years like planting 100 trees a year. There were no trees on this farm when we moved here, like that, maybe 3, but like in 70 acres, there were basically no trees. So we spent every fall for 10 years, my husband and my father and I, planting trees. And in my mind, it was like, wow, by the time my kids are in high school, it will be so beautiful, it will be built up and it'll be such a legacy for them. And it is, it is beautiful. But my father didn't live to see it. So I call these ghost portraits as sort of a memory. It's sort of an homage to my dad. He's the one who taught me about the land. He taught me about, he taught me about love. Like that's where I learned how to love with my father. And he also taught me about like his connection to the earth was something that I think that I picked up on. And so I called it Ghost Portraits, partially because he was gone, but partially because I feel like his ghost is in all of these photographs. And also there's a sort of a presence absence thing that seems to be going on here. But they really are so much about love too. And I think all of my work seems to be about love, about moving forward, and about, we'll talk about that later. It's about justice, really. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. And this is how, I've only shown these once all together. I've showed them individually, but I only showed them once. And it was kind of the perfect gallery for them with all that glass that has now unfortunately been filled in, but they were just kind of hanging with magnets at the top. They almost looked like they were floating. Yeah.
Why are they in black and white?
Oh, they're not. It's just because it's through glass. This is like through a glass door. They're not. They're not in black and white. It's just the photograph. There are other side projects I've done. One of them is this chocolate site. Chocolate seems to pop up a lot in my work. I've done 3 different projects with chocolate. This is baker's chocolate, and it's bittersweet. It's not that real sweet chocolate, but it's still chocolate. And I've been thinking about becoming an artist was about, for me, really like besides proving to myself that what I saw actually existed, it was also about pleasure and about freedom and about unrestricting all the strictures that had been placed on me as a little girl. And so as I look at these now, I mean, I just thought of this on my ride up to Kingston today, but I have a little grandson who's been building blocks. And I think to myself, you know, it's like, and he's playing and he's watching the blocks go up and then they fall and he laughs and then he tries it again and they go up and then they fall. And he's working with balance. And like, that's what I do, you know, that's what I do with these chocolates. I basically watch them, I build them and I watch them, they're precarious and they're fragile. And I watch the towers as they go up and then I watch as they fall down. And sometimes I make videos with them, which kind of show my process. Like, this is how I work them.
Actually, that scale is surprising. Yeah.
The scale of the chocolates.
Yeah, the bricks.
Oh, yeah. It's a very specific chocolate, and I've actually kind of tried to scratch out it's Kaya boat chocolate.
Oh, sure.
And I tried to kind of scratch it out because I don't want to, it's not like an advertisement. Yeah. But this idea of like resilience, right? Like you build and you build and you build, and then they fall. Like at a certain point, they fall, and then you try it, you get up and you try it again. And there's this kind of a metaphor for really for like life and for overcoming life's issues. Oh, well, this is just a short clip of this piece. Anyway, yeah, then at a certain point, I went back into, well, I never stopped doing portraiture. I think from holding on, I went into this next series. I had been thinking about doing a series of women lying on the ground for a very long time. And for political reasons, I just didn't do it. I kept thinking you can't really do that. That's like this old idea that is just kind of something that you really shouldn't do. But I've also never been someone who just doesn't do what I'm not supposed to do. I've always done a lot of what I'm not supposed to do. Like becoming an artist, I was not supposed to become an artist. Like it's literally a rebellion from my childhood to have done this, to literally allow myself to just to do whatever I want and to have pleasure, joy. So, but I thought I'm going to do this because it's complicated. And complicated is fascinating to me. I mean, I'm mostly interested in complicated. So I started photographing. I started asking these friends of mine and women that I knew to come and photograph and like lay on the ground. And let me just jump here for a minute. So this was my third book called Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty refers to the strengths, the beauty and the strengths that we don't always allow ourselves to show to the world for fear of being too strong, like especially for women like this, for fear of like feeling too powerful, for fear of being knocked down. So it was my third book. And so Pop Photography actually named it one of the best photography books of 21. And what Jack Krager from Pop Photo said, he says, for decades, Panas has pursued photo projects combining portraiture with psychological inquiry. This newest series is a complex exploration of femininity. Panas' subjects recline in natural settings with frank and unsmiling gazes, as if unhindered by artifice or fear or even gravity. And again, I try to photograph as many ages as I can. I'm not that successful in getting older women to come, but at the same time, there is something about these young women in the States that the idea of young women is something that I very much relate to, because I think young women are still so open. I think as we get older, there's like this, people tend to close down and they're not as willing to change. Whereas, I mean, I taught for so many years college, and like women were just, the young women were so open and so hopeful. And there's like a beauty in that, you know. And one of the things about the work is that, well, it's so much about my own relationship with my mother, who was a very beautiful woman. So there's beauty kind of related, like beauty and danger are always something that I feel like I mix in a lot of my work. And there's a lot, I think, of that in my work, this combination of like beauty and danger, the danger hidden in beauty. right? And so the portraits are they're always kind of complicated. They're kind of like in vulnerable positions, but they're also kind of looking out like they're sometimes defiant in all different ways. But the rest of this quote goes on. He says, and yet there is an underlying tension. The positions of the bodies, the subject's bodies, prone in the grass, is vulnerable. One that unnervingly both evokes tranquility and calls to mind violent crimes against women. Marina Chow, the curator here, writes in this foreword, but in this space and in this moment, they are in no danger. The women appear unbothered, apprehensive, indignant, assured, exhausted, defiant, resolved, whole. I think what interests me in this work, and really in portraiture in general, is when there's like conflict in the work, when it's not settled, where it actually is a little bit uncomfortable to look at. Seth Rodney wrote in another catalog for another show for this work. He said, they keep their own counsel. We can tell they do by the gaze that issues from every woman and girl in Lydia Panas' Sleeping Beauty series. This gaze confronts us. It is not diffident or furtive, nor dainty or shrinking. It is stone solid in its self-awareness and is absent of request or expectation. No matter where we enter this exhibition, we are seen, and coming to recognize the significance of being seen, we might begin to understand that for a woman to truly have agency in this historical moment, her eyes have to be open. The exhibition title, Sleeping Beauty, is really an artful reversal. And again, the kind of the combination of the girls to the women, it's like we learn this stuff, we learn these restrictions and these strictures when we're little girls, and we carry them up, and to be able to shed some of the stuff that we learn as little girls takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes concentration and real understanding. Yeah. And so while I was doing that, I started making videos, some of the videos, as extensions of the still portraits. These are short 1-minute videos. These are short 1-minute videos. They're, yeah, they're, they're undoubtedly. That feeling of this extra. And what I'm doing throughout the work for over 30 years, as I just think the work works so much together, is a way how I basically work through and basically document the way I've worked through it. Art is supposed to make you feel something. Yeah, I mean, the work is, especially I think this particular series is kind of uncomfortable. And then I did another residency up at Mass MoCA, and I started doing these portraits that I ended up calling, I think I called them unsilenced. I just started doing video. The series is really much more about the videos. I spend about half an hour, 45 minutes videotaping these women, not really talking, we just kind of look at each other, and then I take photographs afterwards for just really a quick, but they're kind of like dance to me. I think my interests have always been more literary, more dance oriented, more kind of long-term oriented, rather than photography. You know, all my pictures are so, find another one. All my work, whoops. Oh, okay, well, we actually showed it up at Mass, this was shown up at Mass MoCA, like projected one night on the walls at Mass MoCA. But these are the some of the still photographs of the same women. There's stills and there's videos of each one of them. Again, this kind of almost like heads on a chopping block, this impending danger. Like there's always this kind of sense of danger, a lot of danger in my work, I guess. That way I think about it is like running towards the danger, which is I feel like how I got over it. The thing by like looking at them straight on. And the videos are all different. There's so many different personalities. These videos are short clips of much longer videos. I'm starting to talk a lot, so I'm going to kind of move on. Let me see, here's another one. All different personalities, all different types. This one. Anyway, this is it's like a 13-minute video. I mean, it's long. But it's
Did you give them directions?
nothing. They all just did, no. I don't give directions. I don't, no. I'm mostly just interested in having them be themselves. Yeah. It's a big part of my work, that letting people go and letting them be who they are, just allowing that space for both of us to kind of just look at each other and just really just be who we are without any masks. Yeah, who would ever think that so much could go on in the soul of a young girl? And then this series I called Promised Land, just these little slips of lipstick. This is from the Natalie Merchant song, San Andreas Fault, where she says, "Oh, promised land, what a wicked ground. Build a dream and tear it down." Yeah. These marks, it's like the marks that are left, you know, the marks that we kind of wear, the marks that we pick up along the way through life and that we wear. But they're so beautiful. And I mean, I think the photographs are so beautiful that I think it's because I look at these marks as whatever we've been through is really what makes us who we are, and they make us better, they make us stronger, as long as we can get through them. So I have a series of these videos where women they're not looking in a mirror, they're just basically making mistakes as they're putting lipstick on. And it's about, I mean, in some ways it's about the marks that are left, the marks that don't go away, but it's also about allowing a certain kind of pleasure, allowing for mistakes. Because the mistakes are also something I think as children we often learn, like we're not allowed to do that, and we're not allowed to make mistakes. We're not, you know, it's like you have to do this right, and I was just letting them kind of go, and I think there's a lot of beauty in the mess that she's making. Anyway, it's a much longer video. So then 2020 hit, the pandemic, and we had to kind of stay inside, and I couldn't photograph anybody anymore. So actually, it was great for me. I mean, I know it was a terrible time in the world, but because I was at home on this farm, I started pulling things from the house and just fabrics from my studio, and my work like exploded with color. I just started working with like things that were sitting around. I would set up these still lifes, and then they would, as they got older, I would just like photograph them on different days, see how they were doing. My niece was staying with us, and then they were posing for me. They were the only ones who were willing to pose for me. So I do have like a model that was at least somewhat in here. Yeah. Like a still life. But it was a time to really go deep. I mean, there were no obligations. I never had to go anywhere. And she kind of liked it. You know, I'm someone who can very easily like hole up and just stay kind of quiet and in my own space. And yeah. And then 2021, we were coming back out and I started doing portraiture again. And while they look a little bit like the Sleeping Beauty photographs, I think what has happened here is that they've become much more they almost like they're surrounded by more growth. I'm not exactly sure if I've picked the exact right photographs, but they're really kind of more entangled throughout the woods. And there's a kind of nobility that has kind of seeped in. I mean, this woman to me seems like a queen, you know, like she's so calm and so yeah. And like part of the growth, and so the growth on my farm, which, you know, clearly every year just keeps getting bigger and bigger, is also kind of connected to my own growth, you know, to my own kind of coming, I don't want to say coming of age because I'm pretty old, but to my own sort of emotional growth. Phoebe Hoban, she's a writer, she's an arts writer. She wrote, "It is a certain quiet strength that is at the core of this artist's work. The thread that weaves through all her images is its distinct declaration of defiance." I'm going to try and go a little bit faster. Again, Marina. These photographs, now she wrote this is part of the essay in my Sleeping Beauty book. It is really meant to, she wrote it about the Sleeping Beauty photographs, but I think it works with these. And it's a nice thing to kind of close on. These photographs exist in a space that is more gathered in, protected, and intimate than in the artist's previous bodies of work. And the atmosphere has shifted from idyllic, pastoral surroundings to being unmistakably Edenic. Panas's women, Panas herself, all of us are moving on, moving forward, and reclaiming the garden. Oh, yeah. So I couldn't stop making still lifes. I mean, once I started still lifes, I was like, this is great, because when I don't have a model, I can do work at my own pace. And I grow dahlias in my garden. And so whenever it's dahlia season, I start making a lot of photographs. So I do have these are huge. They're really beautiful. They don't really project that well because they're actually darker in real life and more solid. Like the backgrounds are much, much darker when I make prints. But it's like it's like the garden has taken over, you know. Yeah. And then 2023, I started a slightly different body of work of still lifes. Again, just slightly different. And my most recent work that I'm doing right now is a series of cakes and cookies and cupcakes and donuts. Really just, you know, the color has just become a very big part of the work now. And I feel like it's sort of like, it's just this pleasure has like completely taken over. And I think about my little grandsons and how they play and how I now, you know, with the dahlias and with the cakes and with the cupcakes and the cookies, I've been playing. So I call this one I call it, She Never Said Let Them Eat Cake, because she didn't. And that's sort of a reference to how like women get blamed for a lot of things that kind of aren't their fault. Like we get kind of blamed for things, and it's kind of a bummer. I can also call it Sweet Smash Swish, which is maybe a more upbeat title because it's such a fun series. So it's kind of both. I'm calling it both. And so I'm taking all these cupcakes and cookies and donuts, and they're huge, colorful prints that, again, when put together, some of them are very pristine and some of them are dissected and cut apart, just like everything else, where I'm looking beneath the surface, trying to understand what's going on, just trying to see what happens like when you take something apart and look at it really more closely and cut open the surface. Then some of them, you know, remind me a little bit of my maybe Sleeping Beauty, you know, I mean, it's almost like it's bleeding in some weird way. Some of them are, you know, smashed, yeah. I've been thinking of kind of connecting some of the cakes with some of the florals. And my very last, this is just a totally little sneak peek at the very last. What I'm doing now is the last 2 months is dahlia season. And because we had like no cold, it was so warm, I spent 2 months like every day photographing over and over again. I have a lot of dahlia pick. I'm going to be showing this work actually in February in Philadelphia. They're bright. And what I like to say is, I saw this, and I think Sarah Silverman had this on her page or TikTok page or whatever you call it, and she didn't know who it was. So I don't know who it is either. But she said, you've grown into someone who would have protected you as a child, and that is the most powerful move that you've made. And I'm going to end on this little short snippet of a much longer video because it's so happy and so beautiful, and reminds me of like the joy of being an artist, the freedom of being an artist, of why becoming an artist was so much about letting go of restrictions and really coming into pleasure. This long video has all kinds of moods. It's really fun. Yeah. I thought it was shorter than this. Okay, I'm just going to end it because we've been here for so long, but she's fabulous, right? There are actually 4 of them. The 4th one isn't in this particular clip, but they're sisters and cousins.
Can you take any questions?
Yeah. Yeah, let me just turn this off. Yeah. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. You must have questions. People always have questions. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to see more of a video of you playing with a giant chocolate. And what do people do with those? Do they I feel like I just take a bite of it. It looks like really food. And I feel like I wanted to see more videos of the chocolate.
I have more videos of the chocolate. Yeah. I do. Yeah. These are all really short little clips. Yeah.
So what is it do they make food or something like that?
Oh yeah, it's baker's chocolate. People buy, I'm not a baker, but people buy these big, they're big, they're like this big, and people, I don't know what they do with them, they bake.
Brownies.
Yeah.
Are the videos, did you incorporate them for the purpose of the presentation tonight, or do you usually, because for instance, when you're at Massimo, you have the stills and video, do you show them together, or was it just sort of in this content today?
I like showing them together. For instance, in 2026, I'm going to have a show of the unsilenced work, like the woman with the blue hair, there's a whole series of them and the stills. And we have one big gallery that's going to be darkened for videos. And then the photographs are going to be on the outside. So they'll be connected, So I like to show them together. Ideally, I'd like to show them together. I don't always get to show them exactly how I want. I've shown Sleeping Beauty, where the room, the whole gallery was full of the Sleeping Beauty prints. And then there was a little corner that was darkened and there were videos in there, of the same women, right? But in the videos. So yeah, I like to show them, ideally, I do like to show them together.
Do you ever do a self-portrait?
Who asked that?
Do you ever do a self-portrait?
I think they're all self-portraits.
More literal one?
Huh?
More literal one?
All the pleasure for me is in the looking. So I can't see myself when I'm taking a picture of myself. I didn't in art school. I did in art school. They weren't that interesting, honestly. Because for me, the magic happens when I'm connecting with someone else, not so much when I'm just making stuff up for myself, But they all I feel like the whole slideshow is kind of a self-portrait,
I suppose my question is related to that. I found it interesting as you talked through the different series, that difference in you describing your relationship with your subjects, your analyses of what you saw going on, particularly with relationships, and then a shift, at least as I was hearing it on occasion, as to an awareness of what the audience, those who, when you and your subjects are kind of removed from the picture, so to speak, that you're very aware of potentially what is going through people's minds. And I'm wondering if you saw that as well. I would say that for me, it was the Sleeping Beauty and then the series of the individuals with food, where you seem to recognize that more. Is that a right observation, do you think? Or, I mean, does it seem more prevalent for a certain series that you're seeing, or more aware of potentially what the audience might step away with?
I completely hear what you're saying. There was a lot there, but yeah, I do think it is more prevalent in some series. I do think the holding with the food. I do think the Sleeping Beauty. Those two are definitely like hitting points. I think they definitely more than some. But I'll tell you when. I think it happens more with the one-on-ones. I don't think it shows as much on slide as it does when you see an actual print. When you see actual prints, there's something else that happens. So if you go back to the first color series I did, Mark of Abel, I remember when that series came out, people were like, oh God, that is so weird. People, I mean, that was 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like in that period. People were like a little weirded out. I remember that. Like, so I think it happens in that series. I don't see it in that series, but people were definitely, I think, a lot of people have kind of like copied that style a little bit now. So, I mean, I don't think you'd notice it anymore. But when it first came out, I remember people were like, oh God, somebody wrote to me from Australia and said, this reminds me of, they think Gumbo or something. I don't know, something that I didn't know, but it was some weird movie that I didn't hear. No, I don't know what that means, but I know he thought it was weird. And I'm like, okay. I do think that it does come out more in some. I think the reaction, the uncomfortableness comes out more in some of the one-on-ones than it does in the groups, because they're more intense even for me. When I'm one-on-one with someone, it's much more intense than when I'm looking at a group. When I'm looking at a group, it's still intense, but I'm really watching what's going on with them, and I have more leeway to pull myself out. Whereas when it's one-on-one, it's a very intense, we are like looking at each other. So when you see those videos, for instance, of Sleeping Beauty, where she's, they're just looking up, like that's what it looks like when we're working. Like that is this is a visual of my process, and it's pretty intense. And I think that that's what comes across. So I mean, I think that's what you asked. I think I answered that, right? Like, yeah, I think in some it comes out more than others, but I also think that in prints, it comes out more, because even in prints, it comes out even more than when you're just seeing it here. I think you even really weirdly feel it in the food pictures. Like I had a curator come out the other day and look at the food picture. I just had them all over my floor, and she was like, ooh. Yeah, I mean, there's something about the work that always has this sort of this discomfort that I feel like I want to always keep it in, because it's part of like, I mean, it's part of who I am, it's part of where I've come from. And I think I don't deliberately do it, but I know that when I'm very focused on something, it's all of me coming out. I mean, I had a conversation with Michael the other day on his Real Photo Show podcast, and we talked about how going on vacation, and how I said, my pictures on vacation are terrible. They're so boring. And I always say, I say to the kids, look at your dad's pictures, because mine are just awful. And I never know why mine look so bad, so stupid, just nothing. And I think and we talked about this, that it's kind of, it's this, you have the same thing, because it's like, I'm not putting myself in, I'm just looking. Whereas when I'm making this work, I am there, like I'm like completely connected with what's going on.
Very physically in those videos
are not. Yeah, so if the girls are here, I would be like,
the Sleeping Beauty.
oh,
So like
like this. Oh, no, I'm on top of them. No,
So
I'm,
they're looking, so what we're seeing through the lens, they're looking at you and you're looking at them.
yeah, it's pretty intense.
So you could just leave the camera there and walk away, but you're like.
You mean the videos?
Yeah.
Oh, the videos. Well, I'm there because I don't want to move, because if I move, I make noise and I'm trying not to make any noise. No, I'm right there. But because the video is on and I'm not touching it, I'm looking at them too. With the camera, when I'm doing the stills, I mean, I am looking through the camera, but I am on top of them. And this is actually an interesting thing about the work, that this idea of like power and trust is actually, I didn't really talk about it, but power and trust is something, you know, as photographers, we have all the power, right? I mean, there's this power element to it, which I don't like. I mean, you have to have it, and of course you have to use it, and I mean, of course, it's part of the process. But I cede a lot of power to my models, like it's part of something that I think is very fair. It's something that I don't like to like do something where we're discussing whether what they did was good or bad. You know, I don't want it to be like, oh yeah, this is a good one and that's not a good one. Like, I don't want to do that, because to me, it reminds me of, and I mean, this is getting a little bit maybe too deep, but it's like, you know, as a child, you know, when you feel like you're not doing the right thing, I'm trying to be like a good mother, right? The kind of good mother that's not impinging or infringing her influence on those kids. It's like, you do what you want and don't worry about whether I think it's an okay thing to do, right? So this idea of justice, of fairness, of letting people be who they are, I mean, to me, that's about democracy, really, right? That's fairness, yeah.
And is this unspoken though?
Oh,
Or is it, you're like?
oh no, I don't talk about it.
No,
I never talk about
so
it.
it's an unspoken.
I don't even talk about it in talks.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't, no, when I'm photographing someone, we don't talk a lot because I'm really trying to focus, but we talk enough that they're comfortable. And I think the trust, I think, is visible. I mean, I think it's clear that that there's something trusting going on there. Like that I mean, when they leave, I love them. I do, I know them. I know their hearts. I really do. It is about love for me. And it's about connection. And it's about, an intimacy. Yeah, Leslie.
So I just want to say how pleasurable it's been. You talked about pleasure. So like just hear you as an artist talk about your men and your family, your grandmother, all these things and your process. So you and I met probably 8 or 10 years ago through some work.
Online.
We never met in person. So I have been honestly watching your work this whole time. And 2 things I just want to say, it's not a question. I find it super fascinating that your early work, and thank you for showing us 90s on, which I think is such a beautiful way to be so generous in your artist talk. The work with the lint, chocolate, and hair is just like all my feminist early heart buttons are just like, oh my God, this makes so much more sense now. But you're not relying on that. You're not talking about the labor of mothering, which is my area of what I love to think about and write about. I love that you didn't mention the laboring of mothering and you went right into this other idea of defiance. Mm-hmm. So I found that to be kind of a defiant move. Brilliant Marina, as always, which I should have read this essay a million years ago. I too was very uncomfortable with you putting women on the ground. But I didn't know why, I didn't know what it was. I know the history of it, but you showing that you're also uncomfortable with that and you made it as defiant is super interesting and fascinating. We're gonna have to have a conversation. So there's no question there other than this whole thing is like, oh, that's it. And I've been trying to figure out for so many years. So
you're not the only one.
Doing something that's uncomfortable and you saying like, I'm doing it anyways, is super interesting to me that the whole thing is kind of structured around vulnerability, beauty, uncanny, slightly, a little bit uncanny, but that you just like push through it. I think is super.
Thank you for saying that. Actually, this is something I wish I had talked more about. This idea of doing something that's uncomfortable. You're not the only one who found that work very uncomfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
I know people.
Figure it out for a very long time.
Yeah.
Not that we should figure out someone's work, but as you're trying to like talk about work, think about work.
Because it's one of those things you're not supposed to do, put women on the ground. I thought about it for years.
A lot of people don't know that though. That's the thing. Like it's almost like a code between a lot of women that we don't do that for various
but I feel, to me, it's, I don't know, I feel like in my circles, like, you just don't do that. I don't know, you just don't do that. Like, that's so uncool. It's like the man, you know, I mean, it's like a predator. And as Marina says at one point, I mean, I'm, you know, people have thought of rape. I mean, people have thought of that. But the other piece I do think is important, and I'm not sure if I've been completely clear on this, is yes, there's this sense of defiance, I think, runs through all my work. But I think the other thing that is also very important to note is that as much as there's that defiance, there's also vulnerability, and that I feel what those women feel. I put myself, those are self-portraits, and those are self-portraits of what I have felt like in my life. That kind of vulnerability and anger and defiance, all of that wrapped up in one, like all put together, like that's all in those pictures, right? So it's like, they're weird, they're kind of uncomfortable because those feelings are really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable to have all this stuff like in your head, you know? But the beauty of being an artist is that I mean, look, I don't feel those things anymore, but I mean, I have felt them in my life, and the work is part of, is an explication or explanation or a visualization of how hard I have worked to really get over this stuff, which takes a long time. This is not easy stuff to get over. It's hard stuff that really never goes away, but you know, I mean, you know, you can deal with it, you know. Yeah, but thank you for that. I mean, that was really nice to hear. Yeah.
So why don't you put women on the floor, or why are you not supposed to?
Oh, because it's kind of like what men do to women. You know, it's like they're subjugated on the ground. So it's kind of like the power structure of like the woman on the ground looking up, vulnerable, and the man with the camera, and it's kind of like a phallic symbol. Yeah. So now I take the position, right? So now I was taking the position of the power, but of the powerful person with, I don't want to say the man, but whatever, the person with the camera. But I am also, what I'm saying to you is this is what it feels like. I'm showing you what it feels like to be me. You know, I'm showing you what it felt like, at least, to be me, to feel that vulnerable and that afraid and that scared, and yeah. So I'm asking the viewer, I know it's uncomfortable for viewers, but that I think is what's the power of my work, the discomfort that viewers come to my work and they have to feel what it felt like to be a victim.
Do you have that conversation with the people that you're photographing, or?
I mean, not exactly. I mean, some people are interested, some people aren't. Some people are like, oh yeah, I get this, I'm really into this kind of stuff. But not really, not really. I mean, not really. Yeah. Because I don't really want it to be also, I don't want to influence them in any kind of way. Sometimes after we talk about this stuff, but not beforehand, because I don't really want to influence anybody and have them, I don't want to say this is what I'm trying to do so that they come, you know what I mean? I don't want them to give me something. I want them to just give me them. I don't want it to be influenced. Like some of the series. What?
Even though it's a self-portrait.
What do you mean?
Because you're saying these are self-portraits, but you also don't want them to know that it's a self-portrait, right?
Oh, I do tell them that.
Okay.
Oh, I actually do tell. I always say to them, listen, these pictures are not really about you. They're not really about you. Like you're there and I'm watching, you know, and I'm definitely all in, and I'm seeing you. And because this is the thing, because like it's not about them, but it is about them too. Like it's not, I mean, the subject isn't about them, but the connection is about, that's what it is. The subject matter is my subject matter and my interest, but the connection is real.
I'm interested in the reaction from hearing everybody. Do you notice a stark difference when you're showing the work between not only two binary, but between women and men, of how they react to the work? So I think women pick up on its uncanniness, but like, yeah, I'm just wondering if you notice a difference.
People are all different. I don't know. I think you'd have to ask the man. I don't know. I don't know. The only way I could notice a difference is if someone said something that I could understand was like, you're getting it or you're not getting it, or you're feeling it or you're not feeling it. You know what I mean? That's the only way I would know. I do think women tend to ask more questions about my work. You know, women tend to maybe, I don't know, sink into it maybe a little more. I'm not sure. I mean, honestly, I think men can have these feelings too. I don't. It's not like men can't have these feelings. You know. But for me, it's a woman thing. For me, because I am a woman.
You put men on the ground?
Oh my God. Okay, I love this question. I love this question because actually, I have a student, ex-student. I mean, she's probably 35 by now. She was a college student. She put men on the ground. She put men in the ground back, I don't know, in the 90s. When would she have been? She's 35, whatever. She would have been, whenever she would have been in college, a long time ago. She put men on the ground and she did a series of men on the ground, and they were so powerful. I mean, I've recently, she was in some of my photos here. She's the one that was going like this, you know, with the tattoos, like out in the rain. She put men on the ground. And I remember I said to her, this series is really uncomfortable and really powerful. And when I reconnected with her, I said to her, my Sleeping Beauty series was influenced by your photographs so many years ago. She was actually thrilled. I mean, she was kind of astounded. But like, I remembered hers for so long. And I remember then thinking, I want to do this, but with women. And I was like, oh, this is so uncomfortable. I don't know if I should do it. So no, I haven't put men on the ground, but someone else did.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Well,
Thank you.
thanks for sitting back, and next week we'll be joined by Corinne Box, so come on back.